Absolutely. Demilitarization is taking place as we speak. The Ukrainians are suffering horrific casualties, not only in Kursk, but in the Donbass. They're running out of troops, they're running out of equipment. That is literally the definition of demilitarization. Um, and I think now Russia has made strategic decisions regarding how this conflict ends and what Ukraine looks like when this conflict ends. And I think that the probability of Russia insisting that Odessa become Russia, Mykolaiv becomes Russia, Dnipropetrovsk becomes Russia, Kharkov becomes Russia, and now Sumy becomes Russia. These are real probabilities that will forever change the map of Ukraine and the relevance of Ukraine going forward. This is the direction we're heading. The day of sitting down and coming up with a modification of the Istanbul Communique of April 2022, which is what Putin's plan was in June, those days are finished. Russia's not going to ever do that. When this war ends, Ukraine will be demilitarized, or Ukraine will be denazified. It'll be the end of the Banderist movement, the end of the ultra-Ukrainian nationalist movements, and Ukraine will be neutral. There won't be any NATO forces in Ukraine, and Ukraine will not be entertaining the possibility of joining NATO. I think these are the three things that Putin insists on, and I think these are the realities now that Ukraine has to adapt to if they want to bring this war to an end any other way than unconditional surrender.
But Zelensky says he's not ready to talk about these things, these changes that are happening. And I wonder when he's going to be ready to talk, because Ukraine is losing more and more.
I mean, at some point in time, people just are going to have to turn him off. And I think that's the direction people are heading. Nobody cares what he thinks anymore. He's become irrelevant. He can't move the needle anymore on the geopolitical stage. He isn't the Winston Churchill. He's just a joke. He's a failed comedian. Everybody recognizes this. He's a man who 100% supports his masters. I mean, if you think about the insanity of what he's doing now, presenting the United States with a list of targets that he wants the United States to approve so that he can strike Russia is part of a larger plan for victory that includes Kursk, includes the invasion of Russia by Ukraine, and it requires the United States to dramatically change. I mean, this man lives in fantasy land. This man is insane, and his insanity is going to sadly result in the destruction of Ukraine. There are many Russians right now who have said that the goal of Russia now is to fix the error of Lenin. And you say, well, what error is that? Well, again, refer to Putin's speeches in the past where he said that Ukraine exists only because Lenin made a mistake in creating it. And so now the way to fix the Ukraine problem is to fix that mistake. The implication is that there will be no Ukraine when this conflict is over. And I think that that's a more likely outcome than anything Zelensky's getting ready to put on the table.
We have two options in the United States right now. One would be the Kamala Harris Democratic Party, that we know what would be their policy in Ukraine. It would be the same kind of policy as the Biden administration. But when it comes to the Trump and his mindset, recently J.D. Vance had an interview with Bill O'Reilly. He said that Europeans should focus on Ukraine, but while the United States priority is China. Do they really think that Europe alone can help Ukraine continue in this conflict with Russia while they're focusing on China and maybe new sort of escalations between the United States and China?
I don't know. What I do know is this, that if Harris wins, she is going to have to put together a completely new foreign policy and national security team. Tony Blinken will not be part of this. Anthony Sullivan will not be part of this. Jake Sullivan, nobody will be. They're bringing in completely new thinkers. And why is this important? Because when she's sworn in, these people are going to be understand that the reality that we see today during this campaign season, where you have candidates responding to breaking news, is not the reality that will be in existence in January when President Harris could be sworn in. It'll be a completely different reality that her new people are going to have to deal with. It's one thing to sit here and articulate, crowd pleasing rhetoric, back Ukraine, stand up to Russia. It's another thing to be sitting at the White House with Europe saying, we're done. Germany saying, we're broke. We can't do anymore. France going through a political crisis. Who knows if Macron will even be the president then? England collapsing under a wave of new taxes and the social unrest. Europe is literally disintegrating before our eyes, the immigration crisis, et cetera. And so all of these expectations about, what Europe can and can't do, come January, it's going to complete. Ukraine is going to be complete. Russia is taking out energy infrastructure right now. Ukraine will not come out of this winter alive. It'll be the end of the Ukrainian state. So all this bold rhetoric is meaningless because there's a new reality that they're going to have to deal with in January. And that reality is going to include a strengthened and emboldened Russia. So I just disregard anything that is said by either the Harris or the Trump camps. J.D. Vance is going to be a vice president who is as irrelevant as this bottle cap. Donald Trump doesn't listen, doesn't take advice. J.D. Vance isn't going to be able to knock on the door and say, hey, boss, let's talk. First of all, J.D. Vance is dumber than dirt about foreign policy. He may have some basic instincts to do this or do that. He knows nothing about Ukraine. It's obvious in everything he says about Ukraine. He knows nothing about Europe. There's nothing in his background that lends itself to this man being a foreign policy or national security genius. He just has some gut instincts. America doesn't get involved in other people's war. Okay, I get that. But he's also a guy, that does the Trump thing, flexes his muscles and all that. Whatever J.D. Vance knows or doesn't know, says or doesn't say, as I said, come January, it's going to be irrelevant because there's a new reality in town. And Donald Trump's going to have to deal with that reality. And we don't know how he's going to deal with it because we can't paint that. But I think right now in this political season, this silly season, what I'm looking more for is not the specifics of how they're going to stand up to Russia. What I'd like to hear is how they're going to keep America out of a war. That's what I want to hear from a leader. How are they going to prevent a nuclear war with Russia, with China? How are they going to bring about an end to this conflict? It's not about Ukraine winning. The conflict will end with Ukraine's defeat. How do you manage that defeat so it mitigates against ongoing, negative consequences? How do we restore Europe? Are we going to need to open up the spigots of cheap Russian gas to come back to Europe, to allow Europe to rejuvenate because expensive American LNG isn't the option? Can the United States, how do we handle what could be the collapse of NATO, the collapse of the European Union? What is our plan? How do we do this in a way that we don't lose Europe in the process? These are the discussions that need to be had. Instead of talking about how some America is going to somehow retain its role as a global militaristic leader who is going to flex its muscles and people are going to poop their pants. That's fantasy. That's never going to happen again.
Do we see unity in the European Union right now? Because even in the western part of Europe, you see the Czech president saying that the Nord Stream pipeline was a legitimate target, and right after that, the German government said, no, that wasn't the case. You cannot say that. How do you see the difference between Olaf Scholz and Macron? The differences between the western part and the eastern part of Europe? How do you see, without the pressure coming from the United States, is Europe willing to continue this conflict in Ukraine or not?
It doesn't matter if they're willing to. They don't have the ability to. So the question's already been answered. I mean, Germany, you got your great German generals, a concept that doesn't exist today. But these bold leaders who have led massive armies into great success around the world. No, they haven't. Talking about we need to retool and reconfigure to be ready to fight Russia in 5 years.